Good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Monday. Well, here we are, virtual learning at its finest. Well, guys, I wanted to do a fun presentation today about the Roman Colosseum and the Gladiators. So you're going to take a break from taking notes. So it's story time with Mrs. Webb. So the Colosseum was designed by Vespasian. He was one of the emperors during the Roman Empire. And he wanted to have an opportunity to share the empire's wealth to the people. And so he literally used the funds that he acquired through conquering other lands, and especially from the Jewish communities, he used those funds to build the Colosseum. And its opening was celebrated with 100 days of gladiator games, chariot races, and sacrifices. It actually wasn't opened until well after Vespasian's death, and it was during the reign of his son, Titus. So it was a place for entertainment. As you can imagine, ancient Rome, they didn't have TV, guys. They didn't have YouTube or anything like that. So when they wanted a form of entertainment, they went to the Colosseum. So citizens enjoyed watching people fight against lions, gladiators fight against one another, and it was just an interesting time period for people, really, because they enjoyed watching people fight to their death, and that was kind of a dark stain in human history. And at the time, the Colosseum was the largest amphitheater ever built, and it had seating between 55 and 60,000 people. Y'all, that's massive because that's the size of Lucas Oil Stadium. The Colosseum had underground pits to hold wild animals that could be elevated to the surface of the arena during these fights. So sometimes gladiators would fight against animals, or as we learned during the rise of Christianity, sometimes people would just be sacrificed to these animals. Here we go. Here's the size of the Lucas Oil Stadium for those of you who have not seen it. So just kind of imagine what the Roman amphitheater would have looked like. It was very similar to this. Something also interesting that the Romans did is the Colosseum was actually built on a drained lake. So they were able to, with their technology of aqueducts, they were able to flood the arena. And inside the Colosseum, they would sometimes have battles between warships. So they would reenact famous fights, and it would be a very interesting battle because it would be several fleets of ships fighting against one another, and it would be basically 1v1, so one set of a fleet and then another fleet fighting against each other, so maybe 5 or 10, probably about 10 ships altogether fighting 5v5, and it would be fighting until the death of one of the other fleets. So again, I just can't wrap my mind around going to that type of entertainment, but that's where the Romans were. That's what they found interesting. Here's another image of where the Colosseum would have been drained or would have been flooded, and they would have these famous battles take place. So the emperor and the Senate, obviously this is where the emperor, this was his bread and butter, right? So when he was here, he was happy, and the emperor had a special section. People, a lot of times he would be in a very good mood. So the Senate would take this time to really kind of talk to the emperor about things that they needed him to make the decision. Because obviously, guys, remember, now we're in the empire phase of the Roman history, so it wasn't necessarily the Senate making the decisions, but the emperor himself. So the Senate would use this to their advantage. When he was at the Colosseum, he would definitely try to be persuaded to vote on a certain topic depending on his mood. So that's kind of what the Senate did, was they kind of bombarded him with lots of questions during these games. They did have to be careful because obviously you don't want to be bombarded at the whole time that you're watching the games, but they would definitely take advantage. So here's just some images of the actual Colosseum and how it was built. And we kind of already discussed this. So up at the very highest, this would be the plebeian women and slaves. And then you would also have different seating for different social classes. So in the middle, the second tier would typically be reserved for the higher classes in Roman society. I'm just going through it for you guys so you guys can kind of see it. So the second tier, like I said, the second tier was reserved for the upper classes who didn't belong to the Senate. So the patricians would sit in this nice section up here, and the upper section would be for the women and the slaves, the plebeian society. So the gladiators were not free men. So I don't want you to think that they chose this life. They were put into this because of positions. Maybe they didn't have enough money, so they decided to be a gladiator. Because at the end of the day, the gladiators were actually fed way better than the poor citizens in the Roman Empire. So they were forced to fight until death. They had to show no fear while they're in the arena. They weren't just fighting against one another, but they would be fighting against animals. And a lot of times, because they were chained when they weren't fighting, they made bonds and they made friends with other gladiators. So if you could imagine, it might be pretty difficult when you're going to fight against your best friend and one of you has to die. So it would be a really gut-wrenching experience to be a gladiator. But on the upside, a lot of times, if you were victorious, sometimes you'd be fighting for your freedom. So there's the other side of the story. So yes, you'd be, fighting against potentially your best friend. But if you did win, you were able to have your freedom. Gladiators, it would be specific types of fighting. So some gladiators wouldn't combat against one another. Sometimes gladiators specialize in maybe fighting against animals. So they would have a specific set of trainings. Another thing is if they were better on water, then obviously they would probably do more of the aquatic fighting. All right, now guys, that's all I have for you today. There are a couple of videos that you need to watch at the end of this presentation. So go ahead, take the time to watch those videos and kind of enlighten yourself on how it was to be a Roman gladiator. There's not a lot of actual content for you guys. This is just a fun lesson to kind of introduce you to gladiators and kind of explore how they were treated in society. If you guys can hear, that's Cohen in the background, so he says hello. Anyways, guys, have a fantastic Monday. I miss you already. Bye, guys.
Okay.